All right, baseball isn't boring because of smart people. So there you go. Because of smart people, we have one with us today, Brian Bannister. Technically, he's called the director of pitching for the San Francisco Giants. I call him the pitching whisperer. The person who really put it this way, Brian, the person who likes pitching and likes to talk about pitching and likes to look into pitching. It's yeah, I there. That's all you need to know, right? Correct?
Yeah, I've been force fed pitching my entire life, 4 decades now, and I'm glad that I actually like pitching. It helps that I'm surrounded by it, inundated, and I happen to also enjoy it.
So your dad was a major league pitcher. Did you ever not want to pitch? Like, did you
I,
ever, were you forced, did your dad say, Brian, you have no choice. You are pitching?
he never forced me, and I didn't want to be a pitcher. I wanted
Ooh,
to be a second baseman more than anything. I wanted to be Dustin Pedroia, and
wait,
I was,
wait, you want to be Dustin Pedroia? like,
somebody like Dustin
oh,
Pedroia.
someone like Dustin Pedroia. Okay.
Like Dustin is what I always wanted to be, and I was slower than crap. I was the slowest guy on the field, and John Savage, who's now the head coach at UCLA, I walked on at USC, and he's like, "You saw me run." He's like, "Hey, can you pitch at all?" Like that's all it took, and
Really?
my second baseman career was over the day I walked onto the USC campus.
You didn't pitch. Did you pitch in high school?
Everybody kind of pitches and dabbles in
Yeah.
it, but I
Yeah.
wasn't a pitcher until I got to SC. And if I wanted to keep playing the game of baseball, I had to pitch.
How hard did you throw like when you started pitching at USC?
I tried out and I was there on an art scholarship. So
Ooh.
they didn't have to give me a scholarship. I was there regardless of whether they took me or not. And I topped out at 85 miles an hour that day. I sat 82, 83. That was the beginning of my pitching career.
Wow. Did it fascinate you? Well, what I mean, obviously, I said you had watched your dad pitch, but did it fascinate you actually once you got into it of like, okay, this pitching thing's kind of cool?
I always enjoyed it, admired it. I grew up around some of the best pitchers of all time, the Tom Seavers, the Brett Saberhagens, guys that had won Cy Young awards and are Hall of Famers. I just wasn't good at it. And so it really was a grind for me. I had to really learn every aspect of it. And I think that's why I relate to and help other pitchers in their own careers is I just start from step one, like how does this guy get better and what does he need and how can I adapt to give that to him?
What is the best of these legends that you're talking about? What was the thing that stuck? And I know that it's a tough question because you get so much of this, but sometimes it's like, oh, I remember this guy told me this, and it sort of stuck with me.
I remember sitting 1992 Arlington, Texas, and I wrote a Twitter thread about it. I sat and watched a bullpen with the legendary Tom House, Kevin Brown, and Nolan Ryan. And
Ooh,
Nolan was right at the end of his career, and he was still out there on a daily basis trying to get better, trying to learn new concepts, trying to reinvent himself. I mean, this is a guy that has the most strikeouts in the history of baseball, and he's out there in his 40s throwing a football, just trying anything to extend his career and squeeze a little more production out of his body.
how old were you?
Uh, 92, I was 11 years old.
Oh, dude, did you fathom what was going on around you?
Like I didn't appreciate the moment, and phones weren't a thing at the time, so there was no way to screen cap it or take a nice video of it. So I just soaked it all in. I'm sitting on a little metal bench right next to the bullpen mound on the field in Arlington, Texas, at two stadiums ago, and it was one of the greatest, masterclass sessions of pitching wizardry and pitching talent, all combined in one session. And I was just sitting there as a little kid soaking it up.
Can you imagine though, Brian? Like if that happened now, because like that was sort of the bare bones. Hey, let's throw a football. No, let's have the leg drive. And now obviously you have millions and millions and millions of different waves of information of coming at you. And it's funny to think back at some of the names that you mentioned if they had a hold of it. It'd be interesting to even see like a Nolan Ryan, for instance. Like you knew a little bit. Like, would he have changed at all if he had the information that you guys have now?
Yeah. And the beauty was in that session, you couldn't have two more polar opposite pitchers style wise in Nolan Ryan, kind of a low, drop and drive, 100-mile-an-hour guy, and Kevin Brown, who had this like tornado twister delivery, throwing heavy sinker balls. Now we get into the seam shifted weight, crazy physics terminologies. And both those guys were some of the best pitchers of their era. And they pitched in completely different styles. And for me as a little kid, I'm like, well, I guess there's more than one way to be good at pitching, just watching those two guys throw.
It's crazy. So, all right. So this is a perfect segue. I love it. I love it. Nolan Ryan was old when he pitched, so he pitched till he's old. So I'm first of all, I'm super happy that you came on. We haven't talked in a while, and it's always a fascinating time when we do get a chance to talk. At least for me, I don't expect it to be fascinating for you, but still for me it is. And one of the things that struck me is when Darvish signs a 6-year deal at 36 years old, and even before that, I had noticed covering the Red Sox, said, oh man, they have like 9 guys who were like 30 and over. And then, Rich Hill had he's come on the podcast once a week in the off season. And we've talked about this, but from your perspective, am I going down a road that is just coincidental, or is baseball accepting older guys more than they did even a couple of years ago?
I think you're spot on. I think we kind of overcorrected. We came out with these aging curves where it said when a pitcher hits 32, 33, physically he starts to decline, too much risk, stay away, stay away. And I think what happened was the smart teams got smart, which is what they do. Most teams are run by very, very smart people now. And they just looked around and like, well, why are these old guys out shagging before a game? Why are they standing on their feet? We're doing, saunas, cold plunges, they're getting massages, they're getting blood work done to find their optimal nutrition and vitamins and supplements. And, what we did was we adapted as a sport and realized we weren't really taking care of these guys through their later years of their career. But so many of these pitchers can do things that others can't. And if you can just help maintain their bodies and educate them on sleep and how to travel more effectively and not beat up their bodies, what's the optimal time to go to bed, when to avoid alcohol, just all these things that most people ignored, you realize that you can actually kind of plateau out the later years of their career, and it's not just a cliff drop off. And so these guys have a ton of value because they have this experience. They don't get sensory overload when you put them out in a big situation. They've done it before. They go out, they make their pitches. They're not scared of, big crowds or the postseason, and they just are mentors to the younger guys. So they bring so much to the table, and we just weren't taking care of their bodies the way that we optimally could. So that's what I think is happening in the game.
But it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I think that you were in the Red Sox organization maybe when John Henry said the famous, the 30-year-old pitchers, comment. And that obviously was stemmed off of John Lester, the John Lester situation. I mean, that was only, 7 or so years ago that was said. And obviously John Henry's a smart guy. I think that, working for him, like they're always, the Red Sox were always looking for sort of the next level of things. And that's a big reason why you were there. Can you look back at of that time and when maybe did this shift, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think, it's happened in the last couple of years, and what's happened is we've also gotten better at taking advantage of gravity in pitching. And, when people get old, we all get hunched over. I'm in my 40s now. Like I wake up, my back hurts, my hip hurts, my knee hurts. It's not fun as you get older, and I'm still early on my journey of getting old. But if you look at the great pitchers, the Roger Clemens, the Pedros, the Maddoxes, they either sunk the ball or they had a great changeup or they added a splitter later in their career. And as you get older, you don't produce as much force, you don't have as much energy. And so instead of fighting gravity with these four-seam fastballs and trying to, get the ball to rise, if you just start working with that force more, you can extend your career. Nolan Ryan's the freak, obviously. He was still throwing power four-seamers into his 40s. But the majority of pitchers figured out a way to pitch into their late 30s, early 40s by leveraging gravity a little bit more with their pitch types. And so they brought all their expertise and experience and feel to the table, along with all the new training and nutrition. And you really just saw them adapt their style to pitch with gravity instead of trying to fight it. And they tacked on another 3 to 7 years onto their career.
Is that what Verlander did from afar? I mean, obviously you're not working with him, but do you feel like, because he's the guy when he goes to Houston, he sort of, there's been a lot of stories written about him embracing this new way of doing things, and listen, the results are the results. I mean, it looks like he's still trucking along here.
Yeah, and he's one of the most amazing hypermobile athletes I've ever seen. I mean, he does things that if you ask most pitchers to do it, they couldn't do it. He has perfect spin on the baseball. His knee, his front leg inverts at his knee. Most people would blow out their knee if they just tried to replicate what he does when he lands on the mound. And so he has some natural talent, along with the incredible work ethic. He reinvented himself. He went through a little lull in Detroit and then coming to Houston. He got way more dedicated to his training and the understanding what he needs to do to prepare. And then you see all these guys come off of a Tommy John rehab year, and they've put so much work in, and their body is fresh that they almost get this power boost the next year. And they're in such great shape. Their arms strong, their shoulders strong, and they go out and just put up incredible numbers. And Tommy John isn't the scary thing it used to be. And
No.
I mean, he was amazing this past year. There's no other way to put it.
So I remember having a conversation with you, I don't know, must have been 5 years ago or something, but we were talking about, and I thought, and I still sort of use this, as you said, everything's predicated on power, like everything, right? Kids now, it's throw harder, hit the ball farther. That's what everything is predicated on: power, 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 power. Do you feel like this, like you've sort of hinted at with the older guys, that it's not that way, that this is, they're embracing, hey, you don't have to throw into high 90s in your 40s to be accepted? Do you feel like overall this is changing, or do you still feel like maybe even the lower levels, it's like you're not going to get introduced into the door unless you're throwing between 95 and 100?
The challenging thing is, regardless of how you slice it, the most valuable component of a hitter or a pitcher is how hard they hit the ball, how hard they throw the ball. And that's the biggest quality, or biggest component of pitch quality. But what we've learned, and as we've studied the older pitchers that had a ton of success, the Glavins, the Maddoxes, the Moyers, etc., they really were able to get into the physics of the baseball and tap into things that made their pitches move like a wiffle ball. And to me, that's one of the most fun things in baseball. We all watch Stephen Wright be an all-star, throwing knuckleballs and having the ball move 3 times on the way to the plate like a butterfly, or with no spin, break 3 feet to the left. And the reality is the seams on the baseball cause movement. And there's certain combinations that if you just tap into it, create wiffle ball like movement on a baseball. And so as your velo comes down, if you're able to add that into your repertoire, you're able to continue to pitch because you simply have more movement and later movement on your pitches than other pitchers who haven't tapped into it, even if they throw harder. And you talk to these hitters and are like, man, his ball moves so late. That's how you can get away with it and really extend your career into your later years, by tapping into those alternate types of movement on the baseball.
And you said, like, I think you said before, like, guys are inventing pitches all the time, right? I mean, so, and I've talked to, I've talked to a few pitchers this past year about the embracing of the slider going horizontal more because the seams were slightly different or whatever it is. What do you think is the next step here in terms of it, whether it's inventing new pitches or prioritizing a new pitch?
We've kind of reached this saturation point on velocity. Every team has pushed the envelope so high on velocity that it's not that much of a differentiating factor anymore. Every team has, most of their staff that could throw 97 plus. And so what differentiates it is the decision making that you force upon the hitter. One way I try to explain it is if we were just standing a certain distance apart and I took a beanbag and threw it at you, not that hard to catch. But then if I take two beanbags and kind of throw them in a crisscross pattern at the same time and tell you got to catch both of them, now it gets a lot harder. And it gets even harder if I throw a three at you and you got to try and catch all three. What we try to do on the pitching side now is kind of this visual confusion. Hitters are in the big leagues because they can handle velo, because every pitcher in the big leagues has velo now. So they're not there unless they can handle it. But what we're trying to do is really get them to struggle with the visual 3D part of hitting and also with the decision making. Is the ball a strike? Is it a ball? Should I launch? Should I not launch? That is really the fun side of pitching. And I'm actually glad we've kind of gotten to that point, because that's more the art of pitching. There was always an art of pitching, but then we kind of veered off and just went pure velo for a long time. And we just been going that direction. And now that every team has velo and every hitter in the big leagues is there because they can hit velo, you kind of have to come up with alternate solutions to get these good hitters out. Otherwise, they will hit doubles or homers every time they make contact with the baseball because they're so good at what they do. So I think it's been fun to kind of get back to, even though it's at a higher velocity now, you're getting back to the art of pitching.
What was the thing that made the velo so high? In other words, it wasn't that long ago when we went to spring training. I mean, I remember a guy named Alan Webster. Alan Webster, when he threw 99 spring training, it was like the best storyline of all time for 3 weeks. Now everybody does it, like everybody. So what is the thing that you feel like made it this way, where it's just commonplace to throw between 95 and 100? Is it conditioning? Is it biomechanical? What is it?
I mean, when you see behind the curtain how many people are supporting these pitchers nowadays, excuse me, and not just in season, but around the clock, around the calendar year, they're going to facilities. They're getting world-class training and support. They're getting PT work. They're watching videos on YouTube, Instagram. They're getting info from everywhere on how to throw harder, how to train their body better. They're sleeping better. They're eating better. They're lifting more intelligently. We're not out running 5 miles at a clip. We're sprinting. We're doing microdosing, like all these things that are just promoting more athleticism, more velocity. And these pitchers are just responding with velocity because that's what's rewarded in our game. So they all have this mentality that if I want to pitch, I got to throw harder. So they're not, they know they got to throw strikes, but they're just obsessed with throwing harder. And everything they do every day of the year is about throwing hard. And when that's your mentality, you just see these guys, come out and they're throwing 5 miles an hour harder than the previous year. And it's incredible to see, just because the training is so good. There's so much good knowledge out there, and there's so much support from both the organizations and outside organizations that are very intelligent and have amazing facilities and technology. And these players are just, better than I ever was, or ever, with better access to equipment and training and knowledge than I ever had. I might have gotten up to like 93 back. So, it's fun to watch how good athletes they become. And at the same time, at a certain point, you have to almost dial that back and go, okay, now we got to focus on pitching and execution and dealing with the realities of getting really, really good major league hitters out, because velocity can only take you so far, because the floor of velocity has just climbed so much.
First of all, you want to get a drink of water at all, or it's up to you?
I got my little electrolytes right here.
All right. Okay. There you go. Beauty of editing. So let's go back to the acceptance of older pitchers. It's one thing to have the acceptance of older pitchers, of pitchers pitching and doing things, but it's also, Rich Hill got an $8 million contract, one of the biggest yearly contracts that he ever got. Like I said, Darvish signs a 6-year deal at the age of 36. This is front offices saying, we're okay with this. We're all right. And I would imagine, like you have conversations with your front office about, hey, do you think this is worth a risk or whatever? Instead of, conversely, Brian, you had just a couple of years ago, I think more than even now. It was we're gonna get the 25-year-old with the crazy spin rate who was a 6 ERA, and we're gonna make him into something instead of having the guy who's already done it and getting older. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think there might be a little bit of a shift here, maybe.
Yeah, analytics, when they hit the scene, and they started in 2007, and it's just been a tidal wave ever since then. Uh, Before teams even realized what the true signal in the analytics were, there was a time when spin rate was like the higher the better, and it was all about spin rate, and then you realize, wait a second, this guy has a high spin rate and he's terrible, and so teams were drafting guys off of spin rate, and there's just kind of been this journey through analytics for most teams, and every team is at a different point in the journey, but ultimately the guys with pitchability, the guys that are reliable, the guys that have uniqueness, unique deliveries, unique visual deception to the hitters that can really adapt to what the other team's trying to do to them, game to game and month to month. Those are the guys that truly have value and will hold their value, especially if they can come through in the postseason. That's something that not everybody can do. And even if you throw money at a young guy, once you get to the postseason, you have no idea how he's going to respond. And it could take several years, several attempts for that guy to finally get comfortable with it and get over the hump and start producing in the postseason versus a known entity that can go out there and give you what you need in the postseason.
Thank you. I mean, thank you. And I've talked about a bunch of players, and like we talk about this sort of cyclical, because I do think it was, and we've had this conversation with a couple GMs who've been on about the valuing the clubhouse and that dynamic. I mean, and listen, Rich Hill, friend of the program, and he has some real life experience with, if you're in a postseason game, it's different. It is just different. And being able to function on that mound at that time is something that, like, to your point, you don't know if you can do. And if you are doing it, you should maybe value it a little bit more than saying, okay, well, now we're going to bring in this guy in the fifth inning no matter what. So I think the teams are, I've seen that even in the postseason recently, Brian. Like I've seen a shift in that. Like, hey, you know what? We're going to ride this guy, where 3 or 4, we have obviously examples of 2018 World Series of this happening. The teams are valuing that more, right?
It's just it's a whole different animal in the postseason because it's a small sample, it's loud, everybody responds differently, and you don't know how you're going to respond until you actually get there. And even if you've done it at lower levels of baseball, when you get all those white towels waving or wherever you're at and it's loud, we're talking about, inches in the strike zone that make the difference between winning and losing. And some guys just can't, come through in the clutch until they've done it a couple of times. And you just don't know until you get there. So the guys that can do it and have nerves of steel or just don't care anymore and just go out there and pitch a game like it's any other game in the postseason, they have tremendous value.
Yeah. So what is it now we head into 2023? What is the next thing? You show up to camp, like you're looking at all this stuff. There's always new stuff. I mean, I remember talking to you about new stuff every single year. So heading into 2023, what is the thing that you're looking forward to in terms of diving into, tinkering with, utilizing, whatever? Is there something new out there?
I mean, the guys out here in Scottsdale have been great already. So many of them have already upgraded their arsenals. They're adding new things. I think the big thing is as you see more people added to these organizations, and not we're not to the point where I call it bloat, but there's so many more analysts, there's so many more people involved in decision making, in just that day-to-day functioning of an organization, that communication and staying on the same page and not stepping on other people's toes. There's really an art to finding your niche, adding as much value as possible, getting along with the people you work with every day, and really communicating at a very high level to identify what the pitchers need, identify the bigger trends around the league, what other teams are trying to do to you game to game, series to series, and being able to in a very persuasive way that's in the best interest of both the player and the organization. Sell the players on, hey, we need to make an adjustment here because this is happening. And if we don't adjust, we're going to get killed in this upcoming series. And, the game is changing fast with the analytics, with Hawkeye, with just the general intelligence of the people running these ball clubs and the organizations that really fire on all cylinders from a communication and adaptability standpoint really have an edge right now.
Do you get the sense that because a lot of these pitchers now at this point have come up with a lot of this stuff, with the idea of a lot of this stuff, that they're more accepting, of because like you said, a huge part of this is delivering the information. And some pitchers might, this is information overload, or maybe they're just not able to they want to take it, but they aren't able to, they just don't have that mind where they can use it. Do you get the sense that pitchers have a better understanding that this is all for the good?
Yeah, it's funny how it's all evolved. When I got to the Red Sox in 2014, I didn't know where to get the pitch data from within the organization, and going out and trying to convince people to use these numbers, I was just swimming upstream every single day, and I knew they were valuable. It just like anything, you have to prove they're valuable. And now we're to the point, I call it Zoom dating, just like this. We jump on all off season with players and their agents, and they go on a date with each organization, and you kind of give your pitch on like why this is the place to come. It's not just like pick your favorite city anymore. It's which team is going to help me from a synergy perspective make the most money on the flip side of this contract. One, I want to go someplace that I enjoy, my family enjoys, my wife loves, but I want to get better because I see too many guys coming to places, having a good year, and on the flip side of it, making $100 million. That I want that to be me. And so you end up going on these dating circuits in a good way. And the more consistent you can produce results for these players and their agents, the more likely they're actually seeking you out, and you're not having to go out and kind of like a college football coach recruit them. They actually want to come to you because you keep adding value year over year to all these players with what you can do on the analytics side or the communication side, or just customizing programs for them. And these guys are getting paid. So whether it's Kevin Gosman, Carlos Rodon, on the flip side, they're making a ton of money. And so then other guys see that and are like, hey, I want to take my shot. Maybe they got, a secret sauce that's different than what I've been exposed to in the past.
Is there a guy that, that you've worked with that just has soaked it in all, and there's probably a few of them, but a good example of a guy who sort of like, okay, give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more. And it really translated and really turned things around for them?
I think at a certain point you can give a guy too much information and they can keep seeking it out. So there are certain thresholds. I'll just cut off the information and say, you're already pitching at your ceiling. It's now just all about consistency and going out and executing. And sometimes you have to literally turn off the fire hose of data and analytics. Whereas some guys, it's the opposite. You're trying to even get them to come in and sit down with you and just have a basic conversation on some low hanging fruit in their game that is going to let them go out and win 5 more ball games. I remember Eduardo Rodriguez, just a nice example. He had some event in the minor leagues where he had hit a guy and hurt him. And so he didn't want to throw inside. And one of the biggest unlocks going into the 2019 season was we wanted him to throw more two-seamers into lefties because he was such a good pitcher, but he was giving up damage against lefties. And a lefty that throws hard should not be getting hit by fellow lefties. And we had to get him over the fear of throwing inside to lefties. And we wanted to add this two-seamer that we thought would really play inside on lefties' hands. And so there's both this persuasive element, analytical element, and then just kind of, getting in the trenches with them and going, hey, it's okay. If you hit somebody, it's fine. And I remember Dana, our pitching coach, or we'd use a pitching dummy, hitting dummy, would get in there. And it's like, if you hit it, it's okay. It's no big deal. And we just had to like get over that fear. And he went out and won 19 games that year. And so that's that's just an example of, the process of applying analytics is different for every pitcher.
And it all stemmed from just hitting a guy in the minors, huh?
Yeah, sometimes there's these kind of residual fears that guys have for some reason, or some coach told them one thing years ago in high school or college and it didn't work, so they never want to try it again. And you actually have to kind of unwind like why it was pitched wrong, or why the execution of the concept was wrong, and why you should go out and try it again because it'll really help your game.
All right. So one of my favorite questions of you, your favorite pitches. I think I asked this once of you. I think you think at that time it might have been Craig Kimbrell's curveball because you're talking about like a curveball that's in the low 90s. But right now, what are some of your favorite pitches to watch of guys?
Yeah, I think the league has gotten sweeper happy, the horizontal curveball.
Yeah,
I had so much fun with Chris Sale and Tanner Houck kind of learning the nuances of that pitch, and those were two great guys to learn it from and help them refine it and develop it. So you kind of see that as like the pitch of the month, the flavor of the month across the league. I'm a huge split finger guy. I love the pitch. You cannot convince me it's harder on the elbow. We've done the studies. I love it. It's the most productive pitch in the history of baseball, and yet ironically, it's also the least thrown pitch. So having Kevin Gosman or Alex Cobb, or I got a little exposure to Koji Uehara in Boston, just guys that are great split finger guys. It's so fun to watch the pitch. And it's really, when you talk to hitters, it's the pitch they hate the most because it looks like a fastball coming out of the hand, and then
yeah.
the bottom just falls out of it. So I will always say splitter, and I love splitters. It's not harder on the arm. People continue to believe that, and I continue to believe that's a competitive advantage because I'll keep acquiring guys that throw splitters. I'll keep teaching splitters, and it's the best pitch in baseball.
Who is some of the best splits in the game right now, you think?
I think Gosman, it's just incredible to watch him throw, and he even took his game to another level. He's started using it even more because he used to mix in a changeup with us as well. But it's such a good pitch, and I love the Japanese pitchers that come over. So I'm excited. I had dinner with Senga in the off season. That was a lot of fun. In Japan, it's a pitch that everybody throws, and
Yeah,
I wish the U.S. culture could get there because people have this general fear about it, and it's such a good pitch. And so looking forward to watching some of those Japanese pitchers throw it this year.
well, what's interesting is Sawamura for the Red Sox threw it. And when I remember watching his first spring training game, and he was bouncing it about like 5 feet, but I think it was the ball. Like the ball obviously is a little bit different.
Yep.
So like you have that pitch, but then like you have to now I have to get used to the ball too. So still a good pitch.
Great pitch.
All right, so I want you to finish things off with maybe the greatest Twitter thread of all time, the David Ortiz story. All right, it was so good.
You know, David is one of my favorite players of all time. Just a tremendous human. And, I have this weird role. I'm going into my 8th, 9th year as a major league coach, and I'm not in the dugout. I'm a pitching coach. I've never been the pitching coach in the dugout for a game in my entire life. So I'm kind of weird that way. So whenever we go on the road, I would be sitting in the locker room just with a laptop open on Baseball Savant or some other site that was just streaming pitch data. And I just sit there and watch the game. And if anything is off, run down to the dugout and say, hey, Eduardo or David Price isn't throwing their changeup enough. Like, let's increase the usage, things like that. But, David, he was dealing with, feet, ankle issues. He was always having to go in for
Yeah, he's
treatment.
lounging. Yeah.
So he just needed to be off of his feet as much as possible. So, get a little BP in, and then in general, just stay off of his feet. So here's me, kind of the guy that nobody knows what my title should be, sitting in the locker room all the time. And then here's, David, who's one of the best players of all time, and just a hero to me. So I was always intimidated to talk to him, even though he's the nicest guy in the world. And so he'd be on the couch, and he was always calling people. And normally you don't call people during a game, but it's David. Like, and he's not calling people about baseball. He's just having great conversations. And he's sitting there. And so this was just a regular thing. He would just call his friends, call his family, just have extended conversations, because being a DH is a very lonely life.
Yes.
You go up, you get a couple swings, you see a couple pitches, and then you go sit down for an hour. It's not this glamorous lifestyle. You don't get to play a position. And so he's just on this couch, and every locker room in the big leagues has kind of a square couch setup. And so he'd always just be there across from me. And I just remember he'd have a earbud in, and he'd be just, one time he's just like, hey, hold on. And he just like, put his phone down, put his headphone earbud down, and just did what he always did. He went out, and I'm just sitting there, and the phone's just still sitting there talking to somebody like it always does. And like I'm just watching the TV up in the corner, and he just goes up, hits a homer, circles the bases, comes back in and sits down, and then it just picks up his conversation again. I was like, that is like, I'm looking around, is like, did anybody else just see what just happened? This is like the greatest thing of all time. And at heart, I'm just the biggest baseball nut of all time. There's people that are bigger fans of me, but I'm just a little kid when it comes to great baseball stories. And to be able to sit there, 15 feet away from David Ortiz and see what just happened, and I'm like, I had to share this with the world. I mean, I was waiting for him to get inducted, and I was like, I got to share this story, because
it's so good.
I've been holding this in, and I just like, this. People need to know about this.
It's so good, and I can attest. There was a time where he he grounded out one time, and about 5 minutes later I got a call. Yeah, hey, did you run that story yet? Yeah. So oh man, that was epic. That was so good, so good.
And I'll never forget, because his very last game at Fenway, season's over, like, he had been doing the retirement thing all year. And I just went up to the second floor. There's a little kitchen lounge area above the training room at Fenway. And I'm just sitting at a little, small table by myself. I cracked open a Bud Light or something. And he came right up there and sat down next to me and just started like telling stories. And I'm like, who am I to deserve to get to sit down with the great David Ortiz and have a beer moments after his last game? I was like, this is incredible. And he just treated everybody with so much respect and so much love. And I just love the man. He's not only a hero on the field, but off the field, and he's larger than life. It was a pleasure to be around him all those years.
Man, so many good stories. It's awesome. It's like, I love talking with you, Brian, because like all that stuff, like your love of baseball, and we talk about this, but also just you're clearly passionate about just doing stuff. It's like, oh man, like, I don't know if you ever I know spring trainings are early, but I don't know if you're like, I gotta go to work today. It feels like you're springing out of bed, like ready to roll. Like let's go. Let's fix some pitchers. Let's go.
It's still a kid's game, and I've had this Forrest Gump journey through the game, and I've been very lucky, very blessed. But I just try to bring that joy and energy every day. And as baseball has gone to more Zoom and more corporate, and I struggle with a little bit. I just love grabbing some sunflower seeds, staying in the dugout or in the outfield, and just chopping it up with guys, and trying to figure out ways to let them enjoy the game more by being better at their craft. And that's what just drives me every single day.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I hope we come on again, because you know what?
Do it.
You are the epitome of baseball not being boring. So be wearing those T-shirts everywhere. It's going to be great.
And Rich and Joe are some of my favorite guys of all time. So
listen, you just got a book. Yeah, you just got a book. Do you remember? We had Ryan Brazier on, and I forgot that he had jumped in the 2018 season later. And Joe tells a story in this book about the Tyler Austin fight. Where were you? So you were probably up in the clubhouse for that, right? Whatever.
Oh yeah. It was amazing.
Yeah. So, but he talked about the meeting after, about how like he was like, hey, their bullpen coach beat some of our outfielders in, and we had this meeting, and that turned to, like everything else like that. It was like for that year, it was a pretty poignant thing about like everyone remembers the fight, but like sometimes like it's, hey, like let's take a check of like where we are. I don't know if you remember that or not. So yeah.
I just remember a couple days later, he either went to a Celtics game or a Bruins game. Like they kind of put him on the big screen and people were just giving him a standing ovation.
Oh, and here's the thing. We said this is that the first 2 weeks of the season, he was the least popular guy. Remember, he blew the game at the beginning of the season.
Yep.
And it's not until he punched Tyler Austin, that. And by the way, in the book, the like driving through Times Square a couple of weeks later when you guys go to Yankee Stadium, he sees Tyler Austin crossing the street and he tried to get out and fight him. Page 96. All right, Brian. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having me.